UiPath Studio. One tool, one installer. 3 ways to automate for every kind of developer. UiPath Studio is intuitive and has many simple templates to get you started quickly. There's detailed documentation and free training with UiPath Academy. And because they are all on the same product, you can share your automations and collaborate on more complex projects, enabling good ideas to flow throughout the company. Get started with Studio today.
When you're building an application, there's a lot of pressure to keep security vulnerabilities out of your code. But no matter how skilled you are, between your own code, dependencies, and configurations, you can't catch them all on your own. But that's why Snyk's here. We're the secure development platform that can extend the security reach of every developer. With Snyk, you don't have to handle security vulnerabilities on your own. Snyk. Develop fast. Stay secure.
Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we had some great presentation and a huge thanks to everyone. And now for the final presentation, I'm introducing Brandon. Brandon is a developer advocate at Narrow Technologies, focuses on community engagement, content creation, and collaboration using the NX open source build framework. He enjoys learning new things, helping other developers solve problems, and contributing open source. He's going to talk about modern Angular development at scale with NX.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Brandon, it's nice to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. You have a really interesting topic. Can you give us some intro?
Yeah, it's about more modern Angular development and kind of what my, I guess, journey to this topic was a fun when I had some community feedback about it, and I thought it would be a good thing to cover. So yeah, I'm excited.
Great. I will let you stage. Stage is yours.
Thanks. All right, so with that, this is modern Angular development at scale with NX, and that's a mouthful, but we're gonna go with that. Yeah, my name is Brandon Roberts. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon T. Roberts, where I tweet out GIFs, I talk about sports, I have fun in general there, so you can definitely follow me there and figure out, some of the other stuff that I do there. As mentioned, I am a developer advocate at Narwhal, where we help companies build applications at scale using their monorepo. I'm also a Google developer expert in Angular, and that just means I've been around in the community for a while and I've been able to contribute and do some cool stuff there. Also a maintainer, excuse me, on the NGRX project, which is a set of reactive libraries for Angular. Excuse me. Which is a set of reactive libraries for Angular. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about the things that I'll cover in this talk. And as I mentioned in the title, we'll talk about what modern Angular is, and we'll kind of talk about how I came across this idea and kind of reached out and got some feedback about it, and what we think about that and where we can go from there. Also talk about the evolution of Angular tooling, and this kind of plays into the modern Angular ecosystem and the modern Angular approach that we're going to get into. And of course, we'll talk about how NX works and how it fits into this picture of modern Angular and the tooling there. So right off the bat, we'll get into what is modern Angular. So if you'll just kind of indulge me for a few minutes there, let's talk about what modern Angular is and modern Angular development in general, and what is all involved in that. So as I mentioned, I tweeted this out a little while ago. It's just in prep for this talk because I wanted to get a feel from others of what they thought about the topic. And as you would have guessed, I got a lot of interesting feedback and perspectives on what that meant. So I'll leave it up to you to find the tweet and comb through those and see if you're interested in that sort of thing. But also, you can definitely still chime in there if you're the kind that likes to reply to old old tweets. Yeah. So the three main areas that kind of resonated with me based on the feedback that I got into that tweet, as I mentioned before, were architecture, which is just overall structure and strategy for your application. Processes, which you're standardizing on the development workflow, and tooling, which is the tools you need to get the work done. So as far as architecture goes, I got a lot of comments and feedback about this, and a few of those things were following reactive principles in Angular as far as using observables, kind of having a reactive application that takes advantage of those. Following the component-driven design, where you have smart and presentation components that have less responsible components, and then the smart ones that kind of handle the business logic there. So good, solid design there. Also being responsive. Of course, you want your UI to look nice when you ship it to your users, and having having that design there with your CSS framework of choice is always a good thing to have there. Defining effective lazy loading boundaries throughout the application so that you're shipping the minimum amount of code that you need to ship to your users, and having that be a good experience there. Of course, one of my favorite things, state management. What your state management strategy is, the library you may use. There are plenty of choices out there for Angular libraries, Nginx being one of them amongst many, but all are good choices, just depend on what you decide that your needs are. And also targeting which platforms that you want to target, whether it's just web, whether it's just web plus mobile, whether you're shipping with Ionic or a native script, or those type of platforms that help you target different ecosystems. All these things kind of play into that. So continuing on that, if we go back just and kind of drill out more than just a single application, we talk about single versus having multiple applications, where it's you may, like I said, you're targeting multiple platforms. You may consider those to be single versus multiple, or you're actually shipping multiple apps as like a part of the suite of apps that you offer. There are also shared components where you have, it's like I said, even if you have a single app or multiple apps, you have these shared components that get reused throughout your application, and you want a good solid strategy around how you want to manage those and make those available. And shared components may end up starting or end up becoming part of a design system, where this becomes an overall part of your overall strategy of how you ship apps. And there's also data APIs that you need to consume or maintain in that way. So these are all things that kind of go into the architecture of what you're building with Angular. There are also processes, feature conventions, and these are just around structure of how features are put together. You also have testing strategies, where, of course, the three main ones here are unit tests, where it's just at an isolated level. Also integration tests, where you're testing across multiple units, and EDE testing, where you're spinning up an entire application to test out a different particular area. And of course, linting and code quality checks. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, because there could be many other things that you consider to be important things for Angular development, not just Angular development. So, and of course, we want all these things when we're developing Angular applications. So it goes back to what is modern Angular. And Angular for me is Angular plus modern tooling. and that is modern tooling that helps you build faster and improve the developer experience when you're using Angular. Because we're not saying that Angular itself isn't modern, because it does promote a lot of modern architecture and modern way of building applications. But there is the tooling side of it, which we'll talk about some of that today, which helps it, take it to that next level there of being in that space. So some of the benefits of the modern tooling that we'll focus on here are, of course, better productivity. Developers spend less time, formatting files and more time writing code, letting the tools handle some of those processes and things that I mentioned earlier that speed up the development process. Faster feedback. Faster testing tools lend to faster feedback on errors and tests and potential bugs that may have been introduced in the normal development process, normal application development process. Better debugging. Using standard tools, when you're having these tools that kind of integrate with your system or your IDE or just your build tools in general, you get better debugging and a better experience from that process. Consistency across teams and tools, and this may impact larger projects, but just in general, just developer onboarding, quicker onboarding of new developers to understand the code base and be able to get in and start contributing, because you have these standards and processes in place, and these, like I said, these tools help make that more consistent. Comprehensive testing. I know that we have those out there who love testing, so they're going to write those either way, but having tools to make it easier and help you to encourage to write these tests will, of course, make that go a long way in encouraging and enforcing good testing practices. And overall better developer experience for developers involved on the project now and in the future, because as I mentioned before, if you have developers onboarding and offboarding off a project, you want that experience to have a good experience there. And like I said, the tooling plays, along with the framework itself, plays a good part in that. So Angular development tools have evolved over the lifetime of the project, and we'll kind of talk about where those tools were and how the things that have come about in the Angular tooling space. So these are just some of the ones that came out of the box. They used to come out of the box with Angular projects. So the first one is Karma, which is, of course, for unit testing that ran everything in the browser. Angular still ships this today, which I'll kind of talk about more. But then we have Protractor for end-to-end testing, which is based on Selenium and WebDriver. It has been around for it was back in use when AngularJS was around, and has been there for a while also. And we also have TSLint for code quality checks. And all these things were offered out of the box for unit ETE testing and linting, up until recently. And these were the patterns and the processes that we kind of used to build Angular, like I said, AngularJS apps, and then on into Angular apps. So we kind of took those tools and brought them forward. So, but the preferences for these tools has changed over time. And if we look at if we zoom out and take a look at these tools today, there's Karma still shipping with Angular projects, new Angular projects now, but it's considered to be a bit outdated, and it's still being maintained somewhat, but I would say it's minimally maintained at this point. Protractor has all but been abandoned. It will be officially abandoned at the end of next year, and it is no longer included in new Angular projects as an E2E solution. And it's not, like I said, not being actively maintained, and it's still being used today. But have been strategies to move off of that. So, And then there's TS-Lint, which has also been deprecated and has been removed from new Angular projects. Has been removed from as a default from new Angular projects also. So you can see how if you're starting a new Angular project today, what you kind of get out of the box is, the framework and Karma at a minimum. But there are tools out there that have come along the way. So as I mentioned, the new modern tools that have come along to replace those would include Jest. And I'll kind of get into, if you haven't heard of these tools, kind of get into where they fit into the space and what they're used for. So you have Jest, which is a test runner, Cypress, ESLint, which is the successor to TS-Lint. And there are also additional tools like Storybook, which gives you extra functionality there, and Prettier, which handles code formatting. And this is not an exhaustive list, but of course there are more tools like this that help you build and ship Angular apps that handle the extra things around an Angular project. So just to kind of drill into some of these tools, Jest is it calls it a delightful JavaScript testing framework, which is nice. Focuses on simplicity. Its highlights are zero config, does snapshot tests, so you can diff those on disk or even in the tests themselves, which is really handy, and not something that Karma does, not something that is built into Karma or that was built into that as a tool, but it's something that's offered in also. Another thing that speeds up the tooling with Jest versus Karma is just that things are parallelized, and as opposed to just running one test at a time, you can run multiple sets or suites of tests at a time, which of course speeds things up there. And of course it's open source, which is I think a good thing to have in general. Just for we're dealing with open source framework, we would like to deal with open source tools for the most part. There's also Cypress, which is a complete end-to-end testing experience, which has been around and has gained a lot of traction in the Angular ecosystem here of note. And then it offers a few things. This isn't an exhaustive list of that, but time travel for EDE tests, amongst other things, and offers better experiences for waiting on processes to finish and request and HTTP request integration. And it's also open source, so another tool in that tool chain. There's also ESLint, as I mentioned, TS-Lint before, which helps you statically analyze your code to find problems. Offers automated fixes, and this was kind of a migration back and forth between TS-Lint and ESLint, and ESLint is more neutral as far as standard space, but it's also of course open source, and anybody can contribute to that, and we also want to stay in that open source ecosystem. So there's also Storybook. So Storybook helps you build components and pages in isolation. So when I talked about before about shared components or even design systems that you can build those things separately and without having to spin up an entire app, and also as used to streamline UI development, testing, and also used as a documentation. It's also used across many different places and many different apps. And once again, we're staying on brand, open source. And of course we have Prettier, and we've spent a lot of days going back and forth about how your code should look and how it should be formatted. If you got 2 spaces versus 4 spaces, and who wins the battle of the spaces. But Prettier is opinionated about that, and it gives you a minimal config to help standardize on that without you having to make decisions on that. And it also has integrated editor support, and is also open source. So we have these modern tools. As I talked about, these are a few of those modern tools that help kind of raise the level of what we think about as far as modern tools in Angular. But then we talk about how do we scale this in a single app or multiple apps. If you're looking to integrate these tools and work with them across your team or even across your organization. Because what we don't want is to just throw everything in a single place and like expect that to work effectively or efficiently. So we want to have some additional tooling around that. And one way that we promote and what we use today is for modern Angular is using a monorepo. And for if you haven't used those before or the term is relatively new, monorepo is a single Git repository that can hold one or more applications and libraries, and also has any tooling that goes along with them, such as miscellaneous scripts, documentation, and more. So the benefits here, we want to be able to reuse validation code, UI components that I mentioned before, and types across the code base. We want to be able to make changes across boundaries of applications without having to coordinate across multiple repos. Developer mobility, which talk about onboarding, creates a consistent way for developers to interact or be able to do certain things in the project, even if those things span different tools and technologies. And also having a single set of dependencies, a single set of third-party dependencies that reduces inconsistency between apps and keeps less actively developed apps up to date, even if they aren't aren't as active as other parts of the monorepo. So there could be some pitfalls here. The biggest trap, I think, for using a monorepo is just copying all your code into one place and saying that is the way to go. And also not sharing code across applications. You're having a single repository. You want to make use of those shared components or utility libraries and also have some consistency across the way for building and testing applications that have many different tools and technologies. A big thing here is running every test on every change, or running every build on every change across multiple apps, which can lead to increase in CI time. So the monorepo plus the modern tooling is modern Angular. NX promotes this modern tooling and gives you these tools that help you enhance your developer experience with Angular. So then we'll get into what NX is. And NX is a smart extensible build framework that works with monorepos. So it does more than just co-location of code. Also has a powerful CLI and integrates with the modern tooling that I mentioned before that we're getting accustomed to using when we're doing modern web development with Angular. So NX is smart. So it is smart in a few ways to help you build multiple applications and libraries together. So let's talk about like the mental model around it and the ways that it helps you. So NX is smart in that it does this in around a few particular concepts. It has a project graph for code analysis, task graph for running targets, or these are things that you want to achieve within your Angular application. It's metadata driven for dynamic tooling, and we'll talk about kind of what that means as far as helping you interact with NX through a GUI or graphical user interface, and also has effective commands that for run against your current code changes that helps it run your monorepo more efficiently. And also has computation caching, which we'll talk about kind of what that means more generally, but it helps you to not run the same computations that you've run before in your project and when you're splitting up your application. So, and also has a dependency graph to help you visualize those dependencies. Also, we'll talk about the project graph first. And the project graph is just used to reflect the source code that's in your repository and the external dependencies that aren't authored in your project. Just Angular, Webpack, React, whatever the tool may be. But those could consist of multiple apps and libraries that have, like I said, have different dependencies, but they're all in that one particular place, and it has context of those different the source code that's in there and that's not. So the project graph is used to reflect that source code. So you have the repository of your apps and libraries and some configuration there. And you have this project graph is a continual process. So it does some analysis on your project where you have your applications and libraries. And when you make a change or add a library to that project, that analysis happens again. So this project graph is always new and current based on what the current state of your repo is. NX uses a project graph to create a task graph, and so anytime you run something with NX creates this task graph and then executes those tasks. So those tasks can be run in parallel. So we have even though we have these two applications that depend on this library, if we're doing something such as testing, application and app 1 and app 2 and library 1 are independent of each other when it comes to testing. So they can be run in parallel. It's also metadata driven. So the things that NX provides come with that enable toolability. So default values, validation, this JSON schema can be used in many different ways. And this metadata is used by NX itself, for GitHub integration, used by IDEs such as WebStorm, and also VS Code. Depending on what your editor of choice is, but those are two of the primary ones that it can be used for. And as I mentioned before, it's metadata driven. So this is just an example of VS Code integration provided by NX Console, which is a GUI on top of NX. And you also have common commands that NX provides that are consistent across, like I said, the tools and technologies that you use. So there are commands that you can use, but these are just a few of them for generating, for serving up your application, building your application to ship, running tests, running lint commands, or even customizing that command, whether it be a deploy command or something custom that you've tailored there. And we talked about modern tooling. NX out of the box uses TypeScript, support for TypeScript out of the box, even for Angular or other even vanilla JavaScript projects can take advantage of TypeScript, or even just regular TypeScript projects and libraries is also a use case there. Integrates with Storybook. As I mentioned before, these are all modern tools that developers want to use, and Storybook is one of them, just being another for running end-to-end tests. Cypress integrates there, and ESLint for code checks. So you have that mix of modern tooling there and the scale that it provides there. So as your workspace grows, you're going to have multiple projects, and you don't, of course, when I mentioned before, we don't want to just have that be a place where everything goes and have it become too slow. So NX addresses this with using affected commands. So what happens is when you run affected commands, it looks at the files that have changed in your PR and looked at the nature of those changes and figures out what applications or libraries were impacted by that change. So here we have changes to application 1, and based on the project graph, that application would only be affected by a particular set of changes. So application 1 would be the only one that needs to be retested. Same with here we have changes to library 1, but that would trigger a change based on the project graph. App 1 and app 2 are affected by that change. So we would need to retest all those ones there. So speaking of platform-wide changes could also trigger apps and libraries to be retested, but based on their dependencies. So even if you have multiple ecosystems that you're running, NX will intelligently, figure those out for you and know when to run certain tasks. So this is in addition to effective commands, where you're only running the particular commands that the particular tasks that need to be run. You also have computation caching. And NX uses this computation caching to look at what you ran against, what the current set of changes are in the code base, and also some additional environmental information about, different versions of Node, whether you're on Windows, and other things that can be customized. So you can manually add that additional information there, but it creates a hash of that information there. And computation caching is local first. So if you were to run the same computation cache twice on one machine, you get the local cache. So let's take a look at if we pick that cache up from your local machine and distribute it to more of a central place. Now that cache can be provided to that particular machine from a central location, but then we can introduce when someone else wants to look at changes that have been already computed, they can also get that cache. And this cache, of course, extends to other developers as well in that same way. So the cache builds, cache test results, all these things that the computation cache can be available to extend to your entire organization, where each machine can read and write from that cache. That way, if other people on your team have already performed these particular tests against the code base, then you don't have to waste time doing that. And it helps you scale when you're building these multiple apps. And as I mentioned before, NX is a build framework that has first class support for React, and support for Angular and Node and Next.js and other ecosystems. So you can have these Angular scale in your monorepo, and if you were using these other technologies, you could integrate those also. NX is also extensible, and what that means is that you can build things that extend the functionality of NX itself. The core of NX works across any different ecosystem or tooling, even if it's not TypeScript or JavaScript based. You can kind of integrate the NX core with that within a monorepo in that way. But the plugins help you to extend the functionality of NX for your particular ecosystem or your things in the Angular ecosystem that you want to support. And those are done through NX plugins. NX plugins are npm packages that provide two main sets of functionality, and those are generators and executors. So generators automate making changes to the file system, and anytime you run NX generate, you invoke a generator. They're using vanilla JavaScript, and you use those to create, update, modify configuration. You may delete files, and you can do this across applications, libraries, and components. Executors are different in that they define how you perform a task. So if you want to serve the application or build the application for deployment, testing, linting, these are kind of the underlying things that NX provides executors for applications and libraries. And there's also the dependency graph that helps you visualize the changes in your NX workspace. And if you're looking at an Angular application where you're, like I said, you're integrating these tools and you want to ship these libraries, then it helps you visualize the dependency between those. But it also wants to help you collaborate within this space of building your modern Angular application. And it does that in three main ways: by letting you to generate applications, generate libraries, generate code for your project, allowing you to reuse and rerun or not rerun certain parts of your code base, as I mentioned, with effective commands in there. So let's get into, we'll do a quick demo of of what we kind of talked about here, and show some of the things that NX provides there. So to create a new workspace, I'll paste the command in here, but we're going to start by creating a workspace. I'm going to use the NX create workspace command, and I'm going to look at creating a simple list of characters. So I'm going to use the CSS preset for Angular applications, and it'll also prompt you to use NX Cloud, so you can use that as an option for faster builds. And we'll look at that, and that will start to create the workspace there that we want to use for this particular application. And what that's going to do is set up an Angular application that, like I said, scaffolds out these modern tools and uses that. So let's see, I may have, so of course I got an error. So let's try, I may have already had this project here. So let's try that again. This is what happens when you run through your demos and you you have already created that those folders. So, but yes, what we're going to do is create that workspace. If we get through that this time, and it'll scaffold out a new Angular application that has the tools, and the tooling that I mentioned before. So while it's running, it talked about the things that we talked about before were the Angular app itself, talked about Cypress and Cypress Ingest and ESLint and the other tools that are created there. So what we want to, and then I'll kind of walk through generating a simple data access library and a component library, just as a general way to show off that. So we're going to run through that when this finishes installing there, and then we can kind of walk through the other pieces of that. But as I mentioned before, the things that NX has lets you kind of customize some of those, customize some of the things in the NX workspace, and customize the things in the NX workspace and lets you extend more there. So that should be done here in a second. If it's not, then we'll switch over and we can kind of walk through what's happening there. Because of course, when you're streaming there, let's see. So while that's still running, we'll look at some of the things that I mentioned here, and we can walk through that. So as I mentioned before, I created the Angular workspace here before, and what I wanted to do is kind of walk through some of the tools that were provided out of the box, what you get in a new workspace. So as I mentioned before, we have apps and libraries that are created in this NX workspace, and what you get out of the box as far as Prettier and Jest Config and Cypress for EDE tests just out of the box. So what I want to show is, so I created this workspace, and what I wanted to walk through is just kind of these steps that were done there. So it looks like we have that workspace there created, but I'll walk through this and then we can show what you would get for your Angular application. So what I start with is how this helps you scale up. So the first thing you do is generate a data access library like I have here. And what this would be for where you would have your business logic for creating service layer or integrating with APIs. And for this particular demo, I'm using the Star Wars API that helps you, or that just provides a set of data out of the box for showing Star Wars characters. And so this is the API that we're going to use here. And I generated data access library using the NX command. And you can do this on the command line or also use NX console, which makes that process definitely easier. So generated data access library. And from here, I generated a service in this library that kind of helps things keep things consolidated there. So according to the API, you have what the information for what a particular person is, characteristics of a person, and I've created a model for that particular person here. So I have an interface for a person, and also have a service that I've created to that will give me all the characters for the particular Star Wars API. So this is just the data access library that will be created for a project. So I'll have this wired up here where I'm using the HTTP client, and we have the data access there. I also have the people library, which this would be where your UI components would go for that particular, for the people aspect of it. So I generated a library called people. So I have a people component, and I also scaffolded this through the service itself. So if I go into the project that I just created, which is JS Congress, and in here I would have started by generating, as I mentioned before, the data access library. And that will generate the data access, and this just kind of walks through some of the steps that I did to get here. I also generated a library called people for the UI part of the application. And so I generated the people library, and in here I'm using the people component or the people service to get the characters from the API. And I'm just showing the simple list of those characters in the template here. And I have also wired that up within the module itself, so I can have the people module in Angular that helps you there. So after I've connected that, you can see I've added the people module to the app module, so I can display that component within the root of the project. And just to run this application, I can use NX console, use serve, and I want to serve my app. And we'll run that. And just want to show the particular way that it'll build the application and serve it, so we can show it in the browser here. So that's building. We also want to quickly show the dependency graph in an NX workspace that helps you to visualize the dependencies in the project itself. So that's taking the time to build. So we'll talk about serving the application, the dependency graph, and a walkthrough of that, and let you see the graph there. So we have our application spinning up there, and I've gone back here. So we have brought up the list here of Star Wars characters, and as I mentioned before, the list was showing there before, and now the list comes back. Yeah, of course I have to wait for the API there, but like I said, this is a simple app, but I wanted to show just the process of how you can split up your application into different parts, and how that helps you scale up as you have different applications and libraries. Lastly, I also want to show the dependency graph and how that visualizes the parts of the workspace. So as you can see, we have my app and the two projects, data access and people. if I show all projects, we can see the dependencies between these projects. So the ETE application depends on my app, and then we have the people library, and that depends on data access. One thing that I also quickly want to show is the affected command. So if we close that and make a change to a particular library, I'll make a change in the data access library for the person service, and I'll take out something, take out some extra metadata for that. And running through NX console and run the affected dependency graph, will spin the dependency graph up, and it will show affected projects. So you can see that by changing the data access library, people depends on the data access, and my app depends on people, and the EDE app depends on my app. So you can also see those dependencies in the application. Now, had I only changed my app, you'd be able to see see that my app and the things that depend on it were affected. And that gives you, like I said, gives you the ability to visualize those dependencies in your application there. So to recap, I talked about kind of what NX is, or modern Angular, and the evolution of Angular tooling as far as using previous tools versus the modern tools that we use today. And also talked about scaling with NX and how you can manage multiple applications and libraries in a monorepo and still have those tooling be a part of that, have the tools be a part of that journey, and continue to work for you in building Angular applications. Thank you for having me for this talk. I want to give a quick shout out to Colin Ferry, who also wrote a blog post on the Narwhal blog that covers some of the things that I covered in this talk. And you can definitely check out the docs at nx.dev for more about NX and building modern Angular apps with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really love how you mentioned the modern tooling and the monorepos. That was quite great. And thank you for the demo. We have a few questions. So
Okay.
the first one is, could you share any best practices regarding multiple teams working in a monorepo? Example, branching strategy, code review, release strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for strategies for helping in a monorepo across multiple teams is the monorepo is definitely going to serve as a place of collaboration. So the PRs are going to be like the central place that you're going to kind of collaborate there. And that's just to keep in mind that even though you have multiple teams working in your monorepo, that all those teams aren't necessarily going to need to be involved in every code change. It'll be only the teams that are impacted by a given change. So if you think about how you could integrate that, you could use the information for particular projects, applications, or libraries, and tie that information into your kind of GitHub workflow and kind of notify particular teams that need to do those reviews. So you don't have to necessarily, the information is there to determine who needs to review what and how they can, how your process is kind of aligned with that. So that would be what I would recommend if you have, like I said, multiple teams that in large, because like I said, large projects usually have a lot of teams, but everybody doesn't need to look at every change. So you can definitely coordinate around that information that it provides.
Great, thank you. And could you describe a test pyramid for scaled Angular application?
Yeah, I think I covered some of it in talk, but of course you have the unit tests, which are, you're going to have a lot of unit tests in your Angular applications, and those are going to be, of course, very isolated. You're going to mock out a lot of things there. in those tests. And you're going to kind of have your integration tests, where they're kind of like that middle layer where you're not mocking out everything, and you could combine like multiple sets of functionality together to see how they interact with each other to make sure you aren't breaking anything at like the integration layer. And then the 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 other part of the pyramid is the EDE test, that you're not going to have a lot of those. Some of those are just going to be smoke tests for testing like base functionality and make sure that your app is up and running and you're not going to break, that you haven't broken anything core to the functionality of the app. So those would be the main areas for the testing pyramid. And how you distribute those is going to depend on what you value the most. If you can have like a small set of smoke tests and then have a larger suite of EDE tests that you may not run as frequently, but you still maintain those as part of that testing strategy.
Great. And are there best practices regarding the structure of libraries, example, core library, component library, or grouping by the type?
Yeah, so it depends if you're building something like shared components or, like I said, a library of shared components. I think those would tend more to be individual libraries and more distributed through that way. That way that you aren't, even if you make a change to one of those components in the libraries itself, everything in the project isn't going to be impacted by that. So you want to keep those a little bit more granular. As far as the other types of libraries, I talked about data access libraries. Those are, like I said, going to be for talking to APIs. And then you have your kind of feature libraries, which I called the library in the demo, like the people library, but you could prefix that with feature to kind of denote what that particular one's for. And also another thing you could take advantage of is the tagging system within NX. And that just, I didn't cover it in the talk, but what that essentially does is let you tag different types of features and then set boundaries about how those features can depend on each other or not depend on each other, because you don't want utility libraries depending on like feature libraries. So you can kind of have some separation there on that. And as far as like your organization goes.
And will it be worth moving from Karma to Jest for the existing project?
I would say depends on how much testing you have in place already. I think that there is a migration path from Karma to Jest, just because they have a common test runner in Jasmine that was used in both areas. So you could set up your test to, or switch over your test to run with Jest and still have that Jasmine integration there, and then kind of move over or migrate your existing infrastructure over if that process goes pretty smoothly. But yes, I have migrated projects from Karma to Jest before, and it was more a matter of like those kind of some of the more nuanced APIs with Jasmine that you may have to convert to Jest syntax.
And what about the NX integration with an existing Angular project? Is it easy?
Yes, you can. There is a command also on the nx.dev website that you can run to add NX to your existing Angular workspace. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can add it to the existing workspace, Angular CLI workspace more specifically, and you can change it to the structure that NX provides with apps and libs, but you can also add that, use that command to add NX to the Angular CLI workspace, but keep your existing structure intact where you have like the source library at the root of the project. So you definitely can migrate an existing workspace, and then the process is automated. So if you have a single project, an EDE project within your Angular CLI workspace, it will add the minimal amount of configuration that NX needs. And then you can start using take immediate use of the build caching and the computation cache that's provided there. You'd have to split up more of your application in the libraries to take more advantage of the affected commands. But once you initially migrate it in, then it's more of a process of that you can do over time. You don't have to try to do it all in one pass.
Great, thank you. And can libraries import components or features from other libraries, or this is a bad practice?
Yes, that's actually a promoted practice. Libraries can import from other libraries because we want the libraries are themselves are individual composable pieces. So it's definitely common practice to share libraries across other boundaries and use them in that way.
Great, thank you. Thank you a lot for your presentation, and thank you for answering all the questions. And thank you all for joining us from all around the world. I want to say a big thanks to our partners and a big thanks to our media partners and community partners. We had a really amazing speakers today and topics, and looking forward to tomorrow's session as well. Have a nice day, and we will see you tomorrow.
All right, thanks.
When you're building an application, there's a lot of pressure to keep security vulnerabilities out of your code. But no matter how skilled you are, between your own code, dependencies, and configurations, you can't catch them all on your own. But that's why Snyk's here. We're the secure development platform that can extend the security reach of every developer. With Snyk, you don't have to handle security vulnerabilities on your own. Snyk. Develop fast. Stay secure.
UiPath Studio. One tool, one installer. 3 ways to automate for every kind of developer. UiPath Studio is intuitive and has many simple templates to get you started quickly. There's detailed documentation and free training with UiPath Academy. And because they are all on the same product, you can share your automations and collaborate on more complex projects, enabling good ideas to flow throughout the company. Get started with Studio today.
Everything is being influenced by code written by developers.
At some point, you're going to wake up and say, what the hell am I doing?
It's hard to believe. It's the largest group I've ever been in front of, I think.
We develop the future.